Good. So, welcome everybody. It's great to have this conversation, and I'm just going to start with a very quick few words about my own personal experience, and then I'm going to ask Adanna and Anesa to share a bit of their personal experiences, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion as well. So, in my experience, basically, when I was growing up, bizarrely, I had some sense of sort of racial comments made about me because my skin was dark in colour. It looks fairly fair now, but I was really quite dark as a child and I stood out compared with all the blonde, blue-eyed children in my class. So my experience was that I went to parties and I was quite often called chocolate and called names. And then the other thing that I had, which is perhaps slightly unique to that situation, was that because I had two siblings that were very fair, I was always being asked if I was adopted. So the sense that dark skin didn't fit within this community. You must have come from somewhere else. And sort of that sort of whole experience was part of my growing up. And in some ways to my son as well, because his skin was very dark too. So he had not quite that experience, but he certainly had people asking about his parentage because they assumed that he had mixed race upbringing, which would be absolutely fine, but it wasn't the case as it happened. So that's been my experience. I just wondered what you might sort of describe your experience of childhood and then into adulthood yourself. Anesa, do you want to go first?
Yes, so for me, I grew up in the Caribbean. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and in Trinidad and Tobago, we have two main races. We have Indians, East Indians being Asian, so like me, which is 40%. And we got blacks, which are also around 40%, and then 20% of mixed race, white, Chinese, etc. So for me, I never really had we had racism, but it was racism between blacks and Asians. So it's slightly different. So it wasn't that you were different. It wasn't skin color was different. Well, skin color was slightly different. It was about hair in our particular instance. And when I was around 10, I moved to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in that country, 80% of the island was black. So I definitely stood out quite, I stood out because I was clearly Asian and they were mostly blacks. So that wasn't actually disadvantageous to me in any way. In some ways, that gave me a sense of privilege because I would say, unfortunately, because in the Caribbean, because of slavery, etc., people with fairer skin and straighter hair is considered to be better in the Caribbean. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's what tends to be. So I gave it a bit of privilege because we were different. And then when I was about 16, I moved to Guyana, which had a different racial mix as well. We had it was about 50% Asian and about just over 45%, I can't remember exactly, blacks. And then another percentage that were Chinese, native, Amerindians, so like native Indians. And again, the racial tensions were there against blacks and Asians. So there were always racial tensions. But when I say racial tensions, I don't really mean that people were fighting each other. It's just that we recognize there were differences because we all had different culture, different ethnicity, etc. We recognized we were different, but it was more overt in a different way. Not overt in a bad way, but overt in recognizing that we were different. So when I say racism, I don't mean like people were being bad to each other necessarily. It was just that we recognize that we were different all the time.
Did the two communities keep separate because of that, or did they mingle quite a bit?
So there is a portion who tends to be in the cities that will mingle quite a lot. I would say in the countryside, then you tend to have different areas that might be Asian and different areas that might be blacks. And that came about because when slavery was abolished in 1834, Asians were brought over instead to work in the sugarcane fields. And so the blacks, they were free and therefore they went to live separately. And then the Asians took over the cane fields. So it became two separate communities because of that. And those sort of background has influenced the way that we interact with each other. But I would say the newer generations, I'll say that's the older generation. The newer generation doesn't really care so much as the older generations do. And then when I was about 25, I moved to the UK. I had already lived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines where I was different. So I was accustomed to having that sense of difference. That didn't make me feel any different when I coming to the UK. I knew I was going to be a minority ethnic group. And I'll just live with that. I didn't actually notice any sort of racism in the sense that most people might think, you know, people being bad towards me or anything like that. I think once I was walking around and a group of young boys, probably about 13, 14, called me Paki. I had just arrived in the UK, no idea what Paki was. And I went, no, I'm not that, because I thought I meant Pakistani. So I went, nope, not that. And they went, what are you? I'm like, well, not Paki. I know that for certain. And I went, but I felt a bit threatened, but only because, not because I think they were being racist towards me, but because there were young boys hanging around on a block, and that just did not feel safe in general. So for me, that's how I felt.
Yeah, thank you. What about Adanna?
Well, like Anesa, I grew up abroad, and I grew up, I think I've told you before, I grew up in, the best example will be like the people who lived in Cadbury's estate, you know, Cadbury's, they worked for Cadbury's chocolate and lived in Cadbury's. And so they probably had, that was the same thing. My father was a civil engineer, and he worked for this, it's quite known worldwide, steel company owned by the government called Ajakuta, and they built houses and stuff. And people came, because it was a new project, people came from, expatriate came from all about the world and was there. I think the only people that were a little bit aggressive were the Russians. We just ignored them, and they called us Alibaba. But we climbed their trees, and they called us those names because we were busy climbing their trees or chasing their dogs. But apart from that, we all mixed very well. I think for me, the big when eventually, the first time I ever felt any form of difference was when my dad's job changed and we moved, funny enough, to my hometown. So my tribe in Nigeria is Igbo. Nigeria is made up of 105 tribes, or maybe more, but there are three main big ones. There's the Igbo, there's the Hausa, and there's the Yoruba, yeah? Igbo is the one that's referred to as the Biafra, and the old Biafra, then the Hausa and the Yoruba, and I'm the Igbo. And we moved down to that area, and only because my dad's jobs always came with a house, and the house that was given to him wasn't big enough for all of us. So what we did was we moved to the house in the home. My mom moved to the house in the hometown with us, while my dad did move to his work area and came back every 2 weeks. And that was the first time, like Anesa, dark skin, yeah, fair skin was better than, that was the first time I ever in my life heard that fair skin was better than dark skin. Ever in my life, I know. So I remember my cousin used to go around, you know, so, you know, like high school, you know, you see it in high school musicals or high school film where the very pretty one will have an ugly sidekick. So my cousin used to make me, you know, both of us would go to church and she would go, I see everybody, I'm looking at her, what's up with you? That's because she thought she's fairer, so she's prettier. And all the boys were just looking at her. Oh, you know, all that stuff. So that was the first time. But I didn't experience that long there because I came over to England when I was 17 to be precise. In England, to be honest, the people that were most welcoming for me, believe it or not, were the white people. They're the people that will always ask me, have you eaten? No. Oh, come to my house for lunch, you know, for Sunday. So I had more very good experiences with them. So my first experience of racism was actually from some group of Jamaican people that I hung out with. And I remember this guy, this one sticks to mind because he just finished studying law. He worked hard and studied law. He got a 2-1. And then I remember he was just like, that he will not, it doesn't make any difference anyway. And I looked at him and why won't he make a difference? Because I'm black, I won't get any job anyway. So what was the point then? What was the point of studying that much? And I didn't understand because when I looked around, there was a difference. You see that the black people of African origin did well. They were the doctors, they were, you know, then you have the Asians, they were the doctors. doctors. And so why would you think that that one is doing well? Why would you think that you're not going to do well? And then the next time I experienced racism was in Bradford, and it was Asian people. So unfortunately, so behind the University of Bradford, there's my house is behind the University of Bradford. There's this road that unfortunately is used mostly by night girls, to do their job. So unfortunately, that's the shortest road. So you go there and they will ask you £20. Then Obama became president, and suddenly, suddenly there was no longer £20 anymore. There was suddenly, yay! I love Black women. Do you understand? So before they knew the difference, but just because I was Black, they just assumed, they could just degrade me. But until then, until Obama became president, the difference is so they knew who were the night girls, and then the Black girls that suddenly were no longer classed as part of the Black. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Black girls were no longer classed as part of the night girls anymore. Does that make sense? So we could walk freely there without somebody accosting us £20, and sometimes not even on that, not just on that road, even when we go on Great Horton Road, the main road, you have people just stop you there and say £20, £20. But then when Obama became president of the United States, that changed. You have people hailing you with better words than before. And then I remember at uni, I was the president of the African and Caribbean Society, and we're having an end of year party. And I went to pick up stereos, and this Asian guy his behavior was absolutely, it wasn't even subtle. It was very, 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 very clearly his words. I just burst out laughing. And so for me, my experiences in my day-to-day living has been mostly with Asian people, unfortunately. However, where I've experienced racism the most is at work. Now, my maiden name is Adanna Asiebu. And then one day I decided to give my dad honor, because Asiebu is actually my grandfather's name. That is just like I will call you Claire and I'll call you Anesa. His name is Asiebu. So my dad answers his first name and my grandfather's first name. So I decided, to honor my dad and change my name to Adanna Gideon, because my dad's name is Gideon. Then I decided to double barrel it so that I can keep the Gideon bit after I can start the person in the double barrel in case I get married. And so I did Gideon Asiebu so that I can drop the Asiebu and it be Gideon whoever. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And you will see it in my CV. When I was Adanna Asiebu, my job interviews were, I got interviews, but there were few. When I was Adanna Gideon, whoops. When I was Adanna Tauschwitz, in fact, almost every CV I just put it. I got an interview. Almost every CV I just got an interview. When you get an interview and you come to the interview, they look and you can see the confusion. It's always very funny because they're expecting blonde hair boys. So some of them are brave enough to ask, Tauschwitz, where'd you get the name from? But others are just, so are you Adanna Tauschwitz? Yeah, Adanna Tauschwitz? Yes, I am Adanna Tauschwitz. Yes. Oh, okay. Come through. Yeah. So that's where it also I feel like it also affected how I was treated at work as well. Yeah, I remember one person saying to me, she had a Darwin Blackburn accent. So yeah, I don't have an accent. I speak clearly, but she had an accent. And she went, oh, the problem is, her English is not so, her accent, her English is not so good. Fortunately, another girl looked at her and went, I understand her more than you. So it affects, it's mostly at jobs. So some of the politics, I didn't want to name it that, but I could see that if I'm honest, it was racial experiences. I just didn't want to name it that. I just felt I could overcome this, and I don't want to name you as racist or name this person as racist, but it was, if I'm honest. Yeah, so that's where I've experienced the most. Yeah, so
it's really interesting, and it's interesting. The two things that I particularly pick up from that is the effect of role models.
mm-hmm.
So that getting role models and people of all colour in all areas, so that that's normalised, and people therefore aren't able to reduce people into little boxes, is really helpful.
Yes, it is.
And the other thing is just this whole thing about, when interviewing, the need to have a way of neutralising that interview process, so that people cannot prejudice from name, photograph, gender, or anything else. And actually everybody is given a fair chance. You spoke about your other friend with his law degree expecting not to get a job. We need to find a way of challenging that. That seems to be a key thing. I don't know whether, Anesa, you would have any comment on that.
I do know from my own experience of my research that we do know that having role models is important, because I work a lot around gender and girls getting into STEM degrees. So that has a very strong area around stereotypes. And I do know from that particular set of research, and I imagine it will go across ethnicity as well, is that if you don't see someone who looks like you, or in that case, girls, who looks like you or from the same background as you, you can't imagine yourself in that particular place as well. So I can see how that can happen with ethnicity as well. If I can't see someone who is Black or Asian or a different color in a particular role, then I can't see myself there. And particularly if they're not from the same socioeconomic background as I am as well, then I can't see myself as that person.
No, you have to be quite imaginative or quite forceful to be able to overcome that barrier. And yet, bizarrely, it takes so little to undo it. I mean, I've had it in the gender stuff with the women vicar thing, where I had people who, when I first sort of came into a role, would say, oh, I'm not sure about women vicars. You just need to get to know me a little bit. And people go, oh, I can see it now. I can see how it works. And they just needed to see it working. But had interpreted that as a problem because they couldn't see it, so they couldn't get their head around it, so therefore it was a problem. But as soon as they'd seen it working, they went, oh, of course women can be vicars. So exactly. It doesn't take much to undo, but you've got to have that role model somewhere for you to be able to get your head around it.
And someone has to break through that ceiling as well. First.
Which is interesting, and in terms of our education system is really significant, because that sort of talks about the kind of books that we have, the characters in films, people on TV, that's a great opportunity in terms of our younger generations coming through, not having those sort of restrictions, by just seeing a mixed group of people doing every role. Then they are left with that freedom to choose what is right for their skills, and it's not restricted by anything else.
I think one of the interesting things, sorry, I'm drawing from my research when I think about these things, is that we have to think about something called intersectionality. So it's not just women on its own, or women's on its own, or ethnicity on its own, because it's women together with ethnicity, for example. So finding a female Black vicar might be very difficult, rather than perhaps a Black man vicar. So we have to think about what those intersectionalities are like as well, and how that affects the way that people might work within the church.
Yes. And that's certainly something that the Guildford Diocese are sort of looking very proactively at making sure that they are raising the profile, and also making sure that they've got fair job interview opportunities, and so on. So they are tackling that. They've got a little group looking at that at the moment, which is really interesting. Is there anything else in terms of experience that you'd like to add in at this stage? Otherwise, we'll head into those couple of questions that I've mentioned to both of you in advance.
Yeah, certainly. Now, in as much as the white were welcoming, they always seem to describe me as Whoopi Goldberg or Tina Turner. Every time. I don't look, you say, oh, you like Tina Turner. No, because that is the only black people they know. Especially when I start singing, there's, oh yes, you sing like Whoopi Goldberg, you know. Yeah, I can see it. You look like her a little. No, I don't. You know. And there was an experience in church. Again, another black reference.
Oh, we've lost you.
The assumption that I, as a black girl, I sang gospel music, you know, that I can do the twee and all the vibrato that gospel music do and the loud voice and all that stuff. I remember trying to explain to background, you know, I don't come from that background. He just didn't understand. So he put me in the choir. They wanted a big black, you know, to do the gospel thing in the choir, to take the choir. I've never done that before. And it's not the background I came from a classical background, Church of England, Anglican church. And we sang, if you want me to sing the cantata, I will sing the cantata for you. But, you know, I can sing Maranatha singers, I can sing, you know, yeah, but definitely did not have Alvin Slaughter in my house or around me. I found Alvin Slaughter here when I came to England. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
So
you're back again to the people jumping to conclusions and sort of putting you into a box, basically. They sort of go, right, yes, you tick that box, I'm going to stick you. You must have all the characteristics of that one person that I know that is in that box already, and not allowing people to have their own story and their own experiences and their own skills and their own gifts. And I guess we probably do that for all sorts of reasons in terms of our interactions with people. I mean, back to Anesa talking about that intersection thing, it can be all sorts of different characteristics that people are labeling and profiling and putting into sort of different characteristics. And I think that's where I choose to use the word inclusion a lot of the time rather than narrowing it down to a specific issue, because I think what we are beginning to talk about is actually just that sense that God has created us all as individuals and all unique, and we need to be treating people on that basis rather than trying to sort of necessarily artificially group or prejudge people. We need to just allow them to explain who they are, not tell them who they are.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I could just be oblivious, completely oblivious in lots of things. I never really felt any sort of racism as far as I'm concerned, except that Paki incident in the UK. It might be because I work in universities, which are quite inclusive places in general. I mean, not always, but in general. And for me, I think the issue is around that people tend to look at me and think I'm obviously Asian and that I must be from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. I don't actually mind that, because I think I make the same assumptions of different people when I see names and what they look like, because you know, I think it's just easier for me as a person just to put people in boxes, and I don't think that's a good thing, but I think that's what we do generally as a person, because it just makes life easier for us to do. And when people make that assumption for me, I don't mind. I just explain what it is, because I think many people don't actually know that there's a huge Asian population in the Caribbean, and I use it as an opportunity to teach them.
I agree.
I agree with Anesa. So I wouldn't say I would necessarily offended. I wouldn't also say that at the time I regarded those things as racial experience. Maybe I you know, races, apart from the very blatant ones. I just thought, you know, he saw me and I'm the same, and there was another girl that loves, you know, so he saw me and the other girl and we look alike, so what's the difference, you know? You're a black girl, you guys like, you know, gospel, don't you? Sing gospel. Or, you know, or the people who were calling me Whoopi Goldberg, you're looking at 1995. Now there are more people here from other countries here. Then I could be the only, just like our church, I could be the only black girl in the church, in the whole area. I'll come to the church, it's a huge church, I'll be the only black girl. So the only reference they know at the time was Sister Act, Whoopi Goldberg, and then Tina Turner goes going rolling, you know. So they just assume I don't look like Tina Turner, you know. And I'll be honest, I made the same mistake as well, because sometimes you can't recognize faces because they all look alike. So I know the first few months of coming here, I just couldn't recognize. Everybody looked alike. So if I voiced it, somebody would have called me racist. You all look alike, you know. you get what I mean? So yeah, just eventually I started seeing the differences in the different faces, you know, or is it houses, all those type of things. So I really didn't take it. To some extent, I still don't take it, but offense, take offense at them or view it. I can see I'm different. It's the kind of thing I would do too. Like Anesa said, it's the kind of thing I would do too, you know, because you're different. You're different from me. Does that make sense? I wouldn't necessarily call you names, but Anesa's different. Yeah, you're different. I'm different. We all look at the screen. It's all different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we get ourselves tied in knots sometimes, isn't it? That it's okay to describe difference. That's factual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not okay to use that difference to discriminate against somebody or to be nasty to somebody.
Yeah.
But factual difference is the reality, isn't it? We're all different. I mean, going back to that statement I said before, we're all unique creations. So that uniqueness is fine. We can describe that and we can celebrate that. And the key thing is celebrating it, not using that difference as something that becomes antagonistic or creates a way of putting somebody down to put yourself up.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
I think sometimes in the UK in particular, and I say this as an outsider perspective, I think some people are very cautious about saying whether someone is a particular race. I remember walking with someone and there had 3 persons standing next to me and said, I want the tall person. And I'm like, do you mean the black guy? And they were like, yeah, the black person. I'm just like, oh, okay. Why did you just say that? Because that made it a lot quicker for me to understand. Because when I come from Trinidad, it's just that's how we describe people. We say, you know, it was an Asian girl, or it was a black person, it was a Chinese person. For us, race is just, you know, a characteristic of us. It doesn't mean that we're racist. Just that's your character. Or, you know, that's part of who you are. It's the same, I think, if you're female or you're male. For us, that's just normal.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. You're absolutely right. I think over the time, personally, I've struggled with that, where you go, am I using the right terms? Am I going to cause offence? So you start ending up sort of, as you say, dancing round and round, trying to say everything other than that, because you're afraid that that's going to be the wrong term and it's going to be misunderstood or sort of create some issues. And so trying to find the right terminology, because I know that is important on one level, is good, but as you say, sometimes we overreact, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's from my perspective, because I think we use that language quite easily in Trinidad. From where I come from, that's the sort of language used. And I don't think it's a language that's comfortable being used in the UK. I don't know if it's a language that you should be using. I'm just saying it's not as comfortable as for me as when I come from Trinidad.
Yeah.
Yes, Adanna, I don't know whether you would have a reaction to that in terms of your own personal experience. And again, we can't generalize for what everybody would feel, but you know, Black Lives Matters is describing black, isn't it? That's the term that's being used. We obviously have people of color and other terms that are used as well. But do you feel offended if somebody calls you black and describes you as black?
No, I don't feel offended. In fact, it's quite irritating sometimes that they don't refer me to what I am. You colored. What do you mean? Am I red? You know, colored lady. Am I red, yellow? Which one? What do you mean color? I'm a black girl. Oh, the one that I have to, even myself, I have to readjust is for mixed race people in Nigeria. We call them half caste, and they didn't take offense. They liked it. They like being different, you know, and we call them half caste. Whereas here, use the same word. Oops. Yeah, I had to change that, you know. I'm sure Anesa is nodding. It's the same thing. Mixed race people, we call them half caste. Oh, she's half caste, and they didn't mind. Yeah.
We have a different name for it, but you know, yeah, we don't call them half caste because Asians mixed with blacks in Trinidad are called Dogla, and that's just the name we use.
Okay. Yeah, and
so we have a name for it.
Yeah. Okay. In our side, it's not derogatory anyway at all. By the way, so Yeah.
Which is another interesting dimension, isn't it? That, you know, what somebody finds offensive, somebody else might not. So, and that can be sort of complicated in itself. But brilliant, thank you for that. I'd like to move on. And the first question I've got is, you know, what would you be saying to the church? And I'm meaning St. Paul's Church initially, but you could extend that slightly wider as well. But to the church, you know, how should we be responding to what's going on at the moment and the whole issue of race and inclusion? What would you want to encourage people to be doing, saying, being?
I think for me, St. Paul's have always been very welcoming. When I first arrived, it was a very welcoming congregation. They spoke to me, and I think that's what we need to do when people walk through the door, no matter what they look like, female, male, you know, black, Asian, whatever. Just be welcoming and talk to them and find out their stories. And I think that's the most important thing: finding out who they are and their stories behind them.
Yeah, I love that. Finding out people's stories and goes back to that treating people as individuals, isn't it? And being interested in them. Brilliant. Adanna, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. St. Paul's is okay. I found them. I'm obviously there, so I found them welcoming. And before I decided to settle with St. Paul's, I went to other churches as well in the area, and then decided to stay in them because they should continue what they're doing. Continue to welcome people and continue to remain welcoming. The church as a whole, is that also part of the question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I forgot to mention one experience in my early years in England. Yeah, my friend Melanie used to go to a different church, and again, just like me, her family was the only black family in that church. And when we were all 17, and so I think they were talking. Her youth pastor was talking to them about relationships at the time, and I don't know how it went there. And I think she mentioned, oh, that a boy fancied her, and it was a white boy. And the youth pastor just factually said to her, no, you can't date him. And Melanie looked at him. He said, the Bible says you should not be equally yoked you're not equally yoked. That's the Bible passage he used. You're not equally yoked. What do you mean? So Melanie now brought out the Bible and said, explain what you mean. You know, this is what I understand this Bible passage says. And I think sometimes half of the problem has been the church, is the church that made it historically. Yeah, half of the problem has been the church, has made it permissible, that's the word to use, to discriminate. Does that make sense? And they've used Bible passage to their advantage to cause the problem. It's a big problem. I think it's not something that can change overnight. I think it's something that will change with time. But I think it's a gradual process, and in the process of, and I think it's the process of teaching. I'm sure Anesa will understand the Sunday school in Nigeria. There's this song, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children. So it helped. It does help. It's why it's part of the reason we don't see color in Nigeria, in Africa, because everybody's the same. Does that make sense? So it helps, starting from Sunday school, to have those things put in. I don't know. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and that creates an individual challenge as well as talking about it in a wider church sense. That actually that narrows back to saying that when we're doing stuff with our children and our young people, we need to look at what we're doing there. One of the things I've been challenged is to look at the resources we use to make sure that you know, the role models, the pictures are varied, and that people can see themselves in the stuff that we're using. Particularly because, let's face it, the Bible characters were not white. So, you know, we need to be using more pictures that are accurate to that. So we've got that kind of challenge, but also that to actually talk about things and to do the teaching, and not to say, oh, well, we don't need to face this here, or if we talk about it, that's going to stir things up or whatever, but actually to go, actually, of course we should have conversations about this and go, everybody's equal, everybody's, you know, God loves everybody, and to be actively, proactively making that point, as opposed to sort of going, oh, I don't know where to go with this, and therefore not going there.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting. Recently, I don't know whether that was planned or just a coincidence. You know, we're going through the Bible. When you looked at the first African that was, is it the Ethiopian? Was that coincidence, or was it planned? It was coincidence.
That was a real God moment. You just went, I can't believe that just, you know, there couldn't have been a better passage picked. And there it was, and you went, okay, fabulous, what an opportunity. So
brilliant. So things like that, you know, not shying away from things like that and preaching it and say, yes, Christianity, God came, is the whole idea of Christianity anyways. Why Jesus was rebelling, he's a Jewish man trying to say that Judaism is not just for Israeli people, it's for everybody, Jews and Gentiles alike. So the whole message of Christianity is that the inclusion, sinners, non-sinners, holy people, non-holy people, everybody is included in that. And God created all of us, and God has no hierarchy in who is better than who. In the eyes of God, we're all the same. And from an early age, and no matter what, and sometimes when things happen in church is better, because whatever happens outside of church reinforces, the church gives you more confidence. I don't know. For me, my confidence, my general self-awareness and confidence has been what I learned in Sunday school. My Sunday school teacher. So I know that when we were talking about which child in our, Josh, for example, I don't know if you're allowed to mention Josh. Josh is very confident, you can see why, because at home he has confident parents. Does that make sense? So the church is like home, let's just put it that way. And no matter what Josh faces in school, that doesn't faze him, because he has confident parents. He's reinforced in the home with his confidence. He's self-aware. I like maths, you know. It doesn't. So you call me a geek all you want. It's okay. I like maths. I can do the pi. I can do the pi to 60 digital places, you know, decimal places, you know, things like that. So the church was, for me, the church, part of my confidence, apart from just be at home, was also the Sunday school teachers, the Christians that surrounded me, and they reinforced in songs like that, in how they, you know, which other Bible passage? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know, those kind of things. You know, Jesus loves you. All those, Jesus loves you. He died for you. Nobody loves you like Jesus. Nobody else loves you like Jesus. So it doesn't care. it kind of reinforced. It doesn't matter what anybody says. If you like, don't hate, don't like me. Jesus loves me. You know, those kind of things. Yeah, you know, it does help. It's just
That's great. So that sort of sense of identity and confidence in that identity, that means that you're actually therefore more resilient to what else is around you, and can cope with that better. Which that's really interesting. That's good, Anesa.
I just wanted to say that when I first arrived in the UK and I looked around at, no, actually it was in Liverpool. When I looked around a church in Liverpool, I went into a church that was it was quite parochial and was very, very white. I mean, there was no other person except white. And I felt very out of place in some ways, because I think they were quite parochial and not very welcoming. But when I went to a city church, they were very welcoming. And I think because they had different kinds of colored skin of people. And I think sometimes maybe city churches are the places where they need to start in trying to be welcoming. But strangely enough, when I went to St. Paul's, I didn't feel like that, although it was a village church. And I think it might be the approach that's being used in St. Paul's that actually helps, which is very much more welcoming and having much more person-centered approach to the way that we welcome people.
And sorry, absolutely. And certainly one of the things that I'm very keen on doing is making sure that people all find a role.
Yes.
So again, that therefore, you know, both of you have done readings and you get involved in services. So that sort of instantly, it's not just a welcome, it's an inclusion, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think having the inclusion is important because it becomes part, you feel as if you're part of the community rather
Yeah.
than just being someone who attends the service for 1 hour and then you leave. Then you
Yeah.
become part of the church itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got from that sort of some really helpful things in terms of treating people as individuals and just finding out their stories and welcoming them well. But then actually really helping people to feel confident in who they are and no matter who they are, basically, and use it, and that's the basis of the Christian faith. So just highlighting that. I would add into that, if you take the Ethiopian character in that story, I like to draw out those kind of stories so that we can see that the range of people in the Bible rather than it being narrowed down. I personally, I'm quite passionate about women being highlighted in the Bible as well, that doesn't get minimized. So yeah, that's another thing that we can do from the front that helps people to see themselves in the faith, and then that sort of sense of being given roles and really belonging and being included in things, really being helpful too. So that's really interesting. Is there anything else that you would add to that before we move on?
No.
No.
Brilliant. That's really good. And where do you think God is in the midst of everything that's going on at the moment? Where would you see God stirring things up or guiding us or leading us in a particular direction?
I always think God is with us anyway in the way we make our decisions and what we do. I think sometimes we forget about God because as Adanna was saying, you know, Jesus sees us as all equal, God sees us as all equal. But I think history, the history that we have of ourselves, our cultural history, influences the way that we behave with people. I mean, I come from a post-colonial history. I think Adanna also comes from a post-colonial history, and some of those things influence the way that we may interact with people or how other people might interact with us. And I think it's sometimes trying to remember that we need to remember what the message of God is, that everyone's equal. We must treat everyone as the same and be more inclusive. And I think sometimes we forget that because of our cultural history. And it's just trying to remind ourselves all the time behind that everyone is the same and we need to be inclusive about everyone.
Fantastic. Adanna?
I think God is definitely, especially in this situation, God is in it because it's making people think. So, for example, it's making even the churches think, make them think. So, before, when you would have thought about white privilege, let's put it that way, you would have thought maybe you're talking about Prince Harry and people like that. But the people in the council estate have not thought that they have white privilege. They have not considered the fact that their name on a CV, helps them a lot, helps them, gives them a privilege over myself or Anesa, for example. So it's making people think. It's making churches think. Churches sit down and really think about, okay, how have we as a church, they're being reflecting. And I think that is a very God situation. A situation that makes people sit down and think and see if God is speaking to you. I've been talking for a while, but you haven't been listening. Now you have to listen. And so they're all now listening and they're all now paying attention. And one of my friends shared a video of their church in America. It's one of those Olsen church. I don't know big pastors. I don't listen to big TV pastors, but it's one of those big pastors' church. And he was now thinking, what can we do as a community, as a church community, to help these people? Because that God told us to do things like that, to help, to be inclusive, to include people and move them along, or maybe make life easier for them, you know. And they were now asking the right questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Before they were asking, I don't know what they were asking, but I felt that they were asking the right questions. They were asking, what can we do? they were asking the Black person, what can we do? You know, I never saw that I was privileged before because I grew up, my mom was a single parent and blah, blah, blah. But now I've thought about it. Actually, yeah, I had a friend who was in the same situation as me, but I'm doing better than him, you know, and he hasn't moved along because he's Black or Asian, you know, because that helps in different, that also affects them in different degrees, but mostly Black people. So I think it's a real God moment. Even as an African, it's making me think as well. It makes me think about my views. How have I approached this whole racist thing? So, like that Jamaican guy, I feel like I was kind of insensitive to him because I never considered I never considered that he has been facing that all his life. I haven't. So he already knew I have no connections, I have no, whereas that's not to say we don't face, in Nigeria it's more tribalism, you know, we have tribes who are discriminated about, but we just push ourselves through, find a way around it, you know, we're resilient in it and we're used to that resilience. And so we carry that resilience here. And I was having a discussion with my friend in America, and she said it's the same thing at work, that you can see that despite the fact that there is institutional racism for Black people, you find that the African ones, or even the foreign Black people, tend to assert themselves more than the African Americans, the ones. And you when you sit down and you understand why, you understand that they have been having that told to them years and years and years, perhaps even generations. So it's making people think. Does that make sense? And and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a very big God situation, and I hope that people keep listening. People don't shut the voice down. You know, I can see there are already distractions already. They're already using other things to not listen and continue what the good thing that has started. But I hope that it continues. I'm so glad that there are recordings. So, you know, people have gone and done a YouTube video and asked the question. People have gone and said that actually, you know, and so there are recordings and forums like this around. They'll keep a record of this time. Should people lose track of what's been going on at this time? Yeah.
Could I just add to what Adanna is saying about when she's talking about how the Jamaican was very different to her? And I think that's an important point to make, because my experience is very different to people who have actually born and live here. I think that they have much more systemic racism that they have experienced than I would ever experience, because I don't understand that in the same sense, because I have never really experienced it. But I think when I came here almost as an adult, so I kind of just brush it off, like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
That doesn't define me. I know who I am.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and I picked up also from what Adanna said of that just when you've heard it, and that's been the mantra in your ear all the time you're growing up, and as you say, not necessarily just for this one generation, but for a number of generations, it's very hard to tell a different story for yourself. And that requires a huge amount of resilience, and especially if you're finding resistance in the community, that is still continuing to try and keep you back in that place that you're fighting out from. So yes, really interesting. I mean, I do think that God sometimes just really goes, you know, I've really tried to get you to do something about this, and you've just ignored me. And sometimes it takes a bigger thing to actually make us go, no, we've really got to see this, and we've got to tackle it. And you know, and I'm really pleased that the diocese, for instance, is doing that. It's taking actions, and not, there's still constantly, we're hearing more about what they're trying to do. So they're certainly looking at that in both a proactive way, but also that we're not going to let this just fizzle out at this stage. We want something to happen from it. And I think it's been an interesting one, because I think social media has played its own part, where there's just been a lot more personal stories out there that you couldn't ignore.
Yes.
You know, I think it can be quite easy when you're trying to hide from something to go, well, that's just them, or you know, we don't know the whole story, so perhaps they've contributed to it, or, you know, you can make excuses. But I think when we've had so easy access to so many stories from people, and some of them more high profile than others. I mean, I think it was interesting that the Olympic sportswoman and her partner and their experience really got through at another level, you know, a little bit further down the line, where people were beginning to go, well, that doesn't really happen in this country. And for her to go, no, look, it does. And it happened to me this week. And this was our experience. And look at the video recording of it. You know, in the past, it's been one person's word against another. But I think now we've got video of it that you just go, you can't just ignore this. And I think as a church, we've been too complicit. You know, we've not stood up for what, as we've said over and over again, is clearly God's view, that we're all of value and we're all equal and we need to stand up for one another. We've not done that enough.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. Yeah.
Brilliant. Is there anything else that you want to add? Otherwise, I think I will let you head off into your households and your beautiful children, but a conversation that I hope will go somewhere to enable people to listen and reflect and have questions. And if anybody wants to ask you a question, are you happy for them to come back to you with a question?
Yeah.
Oh yes, certainly. It's fine. It's very fine. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, we'll see what happens. I'll do a little bit of editing and then share this and see what people want to discuss moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I've loved it.
All right then.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye, Adanna.
Bye.
Bye.
Anyway, see you later. See you later,
Bye.
Claire. Bye. How do I get out? You know, you always find out. How do you get? Yeah, there you are.